Welcome to Minerva. Today we're going to be discussing the relics and locations of King Arthur. We hope to give you enough information that you can go away and then do your own study. First of all, I'd like to introduce my co-host Duncan.
Hello.
So let's get into this, the relics and locations of King Arthur. If you haven't seen the first episode that we did on the historic King Arthur, please go and watch that first because we're going to try and stay away from all of that now. We've done that. Let's talk about the relics. And these stories, they're timeless, aren't they? They have been added to, taken away from, they change and move over time. But the one that I really want to start with is the one that always sticks out to me as the most visual and the most interesting is the sword in the stone. It's seen in just so many stories and even has its own film named after it now. And for me, it must come from somewhere.
Well, I suppose so, even if it just comes from the imagination. But as you said earlier, there are just so many stories or versions of the Arthurian legend. I mean, there's one that's not just a sword and stone. I think it's in Thomas More's version where the sword is actually in an anvil and a stone.
Oh, wow.
And so there's not just one legend of that surrounds it. I mean, again, we don't want to go back on the sense of the possibility of a real Arthur, but for the concept of this discussion, let's say there was. I could understand that there was a ceremony that involved maybe like a sword laid on a stone, or so. Because of course, one of the other things is which sword is it? Because there's so many different versions of King Arthur's legend that in the early accounts, when you look at the ones from Geoffrey of Monmouth, which is possibly I think like 10th century or something, I can't remember. But there is a case of Excalibur is the only sword that's actually mentioned.
Yes.
And so is that the sword in the stone? Is it not? Is it the one from the Lady of the Lake? Don't know. But let's say there is a sword that's the other name that's given is that sword of the King of Kings sword. Is it the King's sword? So there is a possibility that there could have been a ritual for a tribal chief that involved the family sword.
Yeah.
I mean, we were talking about the idea of King Arthur being a Roman soldier, which, as I said, the reality, there's not enough evidence for it, but I love the idea of a Roman soldier doing it. And there is that concept that if he was a cavalry soldier, his gladius would have been longer than your standard sword, and so it would have been more visual. And so if it's his father's sword, there is all that. But how real is another question. But the question is it the Sword of Kings or is it Excalibur?
Yeah, that is the question. And the thing I love about the sword in the stone is the challenge element of it.
Oh, right. Okay,
that there's the sword, it's stuck in the stone and only the chosen one can bring the sword from the stone and then be the King of Kings or whatever. I love that idea. But going back to Excalibur, I think that's, to me, is a separate sword. And it comes from the story of the Lady of the Lake. And again, go away, read the books, read Parsifal and read the other iterations of this story, and you'll get the detail of who these people are. Because otherwise we'll be here forever. But that sword, I've always built up in my memory is that there was these offerings. Knights would come to see the Lady of the Lake, and in reverence they would throw their sword into the lake. And of course, if there are swords at this point, very expensive, medieval weapons at the bottom of a lake, as soon as those knights go off, the young lady goes and grabs them and hocks them into the shed.
A little scuba thing. I get this back. Yeah, okay.
And again, listening to some other people's opinions on this subject when I was doing my research, people would say that actually it makes sense if you have a young Arthur and there's this sword given to him by the Lady of the Lake and it's called Excalibur, that would make him a very good warrior if he received a massive medieval sword at such a young age.
Again, we have to accept about Arthur actually being young and getting all that thing. But
ignoring all of the romance.
Ignoring all the romance. I mean, there is a nice element of where we're led to believe there was a Celtic ritual, because of course water was seen as something divine.
Yes.
And the idea of throwing things into the water for thanks.
Yep.
To throw away a sword or throw a sword in, it was something else. I mean, actually, in the especially from Morte d'Arthur, which is Thomas More's version,
Yep.
it's Bors, after King Arthur is dying, King Arthur gives Bors the sword, so right, throw it back to the Lady of the Lake. And Bors goes, but he says, this is too good, I can't throw it away. And he goes back to Arthur, and Arthur, no, throw it away, and he throws it away. Which it puts in this concept of a value. But in reality, there is a case of, just looking at the sword Excalibur and the naming of it, there is apparently a legend very similar to King Arthur over, I think it's in Ireland, where they have the hero has a sword. Again, the vernacular is very similar to Excalibur, and they've broken it down that both terms actually refer to like iron beater or something like that.
Okay.
But even then, the linguists said it was basically just the generic word for a sword.
Yeah.
But because it's not familiar to us, Excalibur seems this very elaborate, romantic word. Where basically, if we go back to Celtic, it's a sword. Yeah, that's a sword. That's a sword.
And apparently within one of the movies, I think it's the movie Excalibur, when the sword is thrown in, a hand leaves
Iconic.
the lake and grabs the sword out. I mean, amazing stuff. But let's change tact here. We've done the sword and the sword in the stone. Let's talk about one of my favourites, the round table.
Yeah.
So the round table is said to be a round table in the castle of Camelot, which was King Arthur's castle. And it was a table for the knights, so obviously the knights of the round table. I love the idea of a round table because it is said to be that if you have a round table, nobody is the head of the table.
Yeah.
There isn't at that point, everybody's equal. And to me, that's just, it has great connotations with Freemasonry, being on the level, everybody being equal, and also just trying to manage egos at that point. But what do you think about the round table? Is there any way that this could have been a real thing?
Not so much in the sense of a real table. I mean, I think both of us independently have seen the one at is it Winchester? Yeah. I can't remember which king it was, but apparently I think something in my brain saying one of the Edwards, where because to us the Arthurian legends are very popular and very alive. But there were times when it lulled down. But there was a period when the idea of chivalry became very popular again, and this idea of a round table was there. The interesting thing is the case of when we look at British history. We're talking quite flippantly about the Arthurian period, but we forget that after that we've got things like the Norman invasion in 1066, where actually the Brits became serfs again. We became slaves because we had the Normans come in, and we lost. We then started getting a culture of hierarchy, and so I can understand that because originally. It was apparently common practice that if there was a tribal dispute, that the knights or the equivalent prior to actually real knights being there would sit in a circle, purely for the sense of there is nobody leading, they're all being equal. As you say, not just to deal with the egos, but just who's right in this dilemma. So the idea of sitting in a circle seems to be historic, but I think we gained the popularity and passion for it is because in our English culture, we've had this thing of hierarchy. And no matter how much we deal with our social class system, we like the idea of equality. And it's this idea of King Arthur bringing it forward. I think it's a lovely idea. Reality, I think, is just a legacy from a historical perspective. I did read once, and I can't remember where, this is going back decades, where some, I don't want to say scholar, it was somebody who had a theory that it wasn't actually a round table, but it was actually a round building. Okay. In the sense of, because of course, if we're looking at the time when the Romans left, when we watch films, we see these lovely castles and stuff, but they weren't castles when the Romans were, they had wooden forts. Yeah. The only possible structures they would have been amphitheatres, which would have been some round, but more like an oval sort of thing. So the idea could have been, I don't particularly agree with it, but it was quite an entertaining thought, that the round table was actually referring to an old amphitheatre, which then would have been the castle, which then would have been Camelot.
Yes, and that's where we move on to that location.
So segue.
A brilliant name drop there for Camelot. Yes, Arthur's castle in Camelot. It's so interesting because so many people think it is in completely different places. And you'll have people really, really staunch about it's here or it's there or it's another place, etc., etc., etc. But I think the majority, or one of the very good places to talk about, is Tintagel in Cornwall.
Okay.
And that is, a mystical place. It's where, in some of the stories, it's said that he was born, etc., etc. And, I think it is a place that it could have been. But what about, where do you think it is? Where do you think Camelot is, or if do you feel it was a place in itself?
I like how often you use the word. It's a mystical place.
It's a mystical.
It's a castle. It's kind of ruined. It's old. I mean, unfortunately, I don't know. For myself, if you read through one thing is a case of Camelot is. To me, is similar to Atlantis.
Yes.
You've got people who are adamant that it exists, and it's adamant it's here. There's rumors of being in Germany, Spain. I wouldn't be surprised if someone's actually argued it's in America. It wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah.
But for myself, if you read the various legends, there are places that really exist. Tintagel is mentioned even in the oldest records of King Arthur. So for me, there is a reason why Camelot, as a word, as a name, is not a real place. And for me, it's one of those things because it's meant to be a place of ideals. It's meant to be a place of perfect. That if they actually related it to a physical place, it would take away the mythos that's meant to surround it. So I don't think Camelot actually exists in any sense of the word. And I think it's purposely not meant to exist to give it that added impetus of being mythical and pure and there. So I don't think it actually exists in its own right.
Well, we did have that kind of breaking news story of the Artognou stone that was found in, and I was just about to say Camelot then, but in Tintagel, could be Camelot, in the late 90s. And a lot of scholars believe that that's a real stone from the real period, and it all seems to date correctly, but I don't think you're as keen, are you?
When you say a lot of scholars, I think there's a lot more that turn around and say
Probably,
no.
yes.
Because I think they dated it. I think it's like, it did go back to the 6th century. But when we're looking at the first records, the actual historical Arthur, we're looking more like the 4th century. That's like 200 years before that. And the only thing is the name is similar, but why would you? But it begins with an A. I think that's as far as it goes. Yeah. So no, for me, of actually being evidence, no.
Okay, well let's move on because it's easier to do that now. I think the next one that we really want to talk about is the Shield of Arimathea, and I know that's one of your favourites. With Everlac the Unknown. Yeah,
unknown in so many ways because it's one of these beautiful stories. That's in the later, I think it was Boron, one of the popular French writers after Christian de Troyes, who started mixing, I think we said in the earlier episode, the Christian elements in there.
Yes.
And he had already written a storyline for Joseph of Arimathea, which we know features in the later parts of the Arthurian legends. But the legend, the concept is apparently there was Everlac became friends with Joseph of Arimathea. Joseph converted him to Christianity.
Right.
And one of the gifts he gave him was this white shield that apparently had a scene of the crucifixion on, or is it the resurrection? One of the two. And some stories it's just a plain white shield. But he gives it to his friend, and it's meant to be magical powers of defense, etc. And then the story goes on that Joseph of Arimathea came to England and to Cornwall, to Glastonbury eventually, and Everlac, the king, missed him, and so he came with him, and eventually died in Glastonbury, and the shield was left behind. There's two different stories. There's one where actually on the white shield there was the blood of Christ put into a white cross, or some of the legends say that Joseph of Arimathea put ribbons on the white cross. But of course, we've got to mention them. The idea of a white shield with the red crosses on it, we've got our Knights Templars. We've got to fit them in somewhere. But it goes on. It says that when he died, that apparently the shield was left at the Glastonbury Abbey, and certain knights came to say, this is actually in the legend part, certain knights used to come and try and steal it, but this spectre white knight would always chase them down and bring the shield back. Which, of course, goes back to our Knight Templars being the White Knights, bring it all through. But apparently, I can't remember if it's Gawain or Percival, one of the two, actually goes and they manage to retrieve the shield. Yeah. And the Spectre says, no, you're worthy, you're meant to have it, and it goes on. But it's one of those wonderful relics. There's so many in the Arthurian legends. We're lost with certain things like the Grail and the certain swords, but there's so many other ones that are in the stories that have so much depth, also to an obscure level. But this then takes us, of course, to Glastonbury.
And Glastonbury has a huge amount to give within this myth, shall we call it, because, I mean, even today, if you go and visit Glastonbury and you walk around the Abbey, it's not a lot of sort of fanfare or anything around it, but within just the grounds there's a plaque that says, here is the tomb of Arthur,
right.
And it tells us that is the tomb of Arthur. And again, looking at the stories and different people that will give you their writings on the Arthurian legends. Some believe that Arthur was actually buried there. Some believe that he was buried in the Glastonbury Tor, and both of those are sites that have held churches, castles, etc. for years and years and years and years. So, what are your thoughts on that? Because for me, there's always, and having been there a number of times, it's always quite tongue-in-cheek when someone says, "Oh, here's Arthur's grave." Moving on, as if they really don't want to have any questions on it.
Yeah, well, because it is. It's. I think in reality we take it as being a myth that Arthur didn't actually exist. But the lovely part at the end of the story, of course, when Arthur does die, the legend goes that he's laid in a boat, and it's. Some say it was nuns, some like almost angelic female figures, take him across the waters and take him to Avalon, which is generally taken as being Glastonbury Tor. And I don't know where I was. I wish I could remember it. Now, I know I'm the resident cynic and very happy to be so. And I've mocked you a few moments ago saying about things seems like mystical.
Yes.
But there was, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to put my hands up. There was a time I was visiting Glastonbury and I came over a small ridge and you realise what a beautiful plain it actually is. And you see Glastonbury Tor sticking up. And of course, it's very easy for that place to see as being waterlogged. And so a low boat ride could go through. But I actually saw it when there was just a mist going across the valley. You just saw Glastonbury Tor sticking up. And it was, I hate to sort of say it, but it was quite a spiritual experience. I don't believe it is the resting place of King Arthur. No. But if you want to envisage something that was very British, of a British historic monarch, of our core legends, you could see the idea of this boat cutting through the mist and taken to his final resting place. Beautiful.
It does work really well when you're there, and if you get there in that thick fog, and the Tor's sticking
not in November when it's pouring rain.
No, exactly.
There is no mystical feel.
No, it's amazing, and that you saying that you're the resident cynic, and we're going to slightly switch over here because the other thing that Glastonbury has to offer is the Chalice Well.
Yeah,
something that's visited, and it's supposedly got healing waters, but. For me, I just that's something that I really can never get on board with. Any type of healing waters. I can appreciate that water can have better minerals and can be better for you, etc. But I'm not having a Chalice Well.
No, but apparently, I've known some people who know Nicolas Cage.
Yes.
Apparently, he has his own bottle which he sends down to get refilled from the Chalice Well. So he's definitely a believer in the healing powers of the water, which of course, if King Arthur was meant to be getting healed on the island of Avalon, water would have been the best medicine.
Yes, well...
From the Hackett to death from Mordred.
Well, we're getting dangerously close talking about chalices to the Holy Grail, but we're not going to do that this one. In the next episode, we'll be talking about the Holy Grail. But just overall, I've got a real love for these objects, but I enjoy any of these discussions about sacred relics and that type of thing. And, it feels, again, like the Jesus mysteries where there are, within the Jesus mysteries, there are so many relics and so many parts of Jesus that if you put them all together, there'd be 10 Jesuses.
Enough nails to build another ark.
Exactly. In churches and chapels all over the world, these things are held. But I just think, the sword in the stone is just so iconic, and I really want to believe that was a real thing and that it was stuck and nobody could get it out, and this brilliant guy came along and did it. But actually, it's metaphor. I think these are romances that are written just for us to appreciate that and to really be able to walk a pathway, almost a spiritual pathway, in learning how, in what these things mean and what they mean to us. But what are your final thoughts on objects in general with these Arthurian
Well, I agree with you very much in the sense that there is a moral tale there. And I think, to take each in point, I don't believe, the round table, I think the concept of the round table in the story, as we said in our last episode, that there is what's missed in reading or in the modern dramatizations of Arthurian legends, that it's done for the drama, it's done for the love story, where it's not. It's looking at the original context. You've got each character shows what it's like to deal with a human element. I said to you, Arthur deals with duty, duty beyond any affection. All the concepts, each character there shows how difficult it is to face a problem. And I think that essence, that we're meant to be looking at these stories as being moral plays, the round table just emphasizes that even more. It's about, we're seeing this as equality. If you're looking at this point of humanity, this is what it's about. So it's real in the sense of what it's meant to do as a purpose, as you say, as a metaphor. Camelot, again, I see, as I said earlier, I see as a metaphor. It's not a real place. It's not intended to be seen as a real place. It is intended to be somewhere that is unknown, therefore beyond reality. And so it's a pure concept that is even set to us in that part. The only one, and it's almost shameful to admit, that I would hold any passion for, there's that case of, if we did have a character, as we said, we hear about this guy, Arthur, or whatever ancient Celtic we have for this guy who around about 300 AD was killing off Celts or Brits or defending thing. He more likely had a weapon. Whether it was a sword, whether it's just a spear, it would have been his weapon. He would have prized it. It would have existed. And it's like anything. If there was a physical matter, because it could have disintegrated completely. Yeah. Even if there is a rusty spearhead somewhere, that is, our Excalibur. It is the weapon of Arthur there. Whether it has magical healing powers or whatever, which like his scabbard is something else. But to an argument, that would exist.
Well, the one we haven't mentioned is the Holy Grail, and that is coming up in our next episode. So we'll see if you believe in the Holy Grail and what you believe in the Holy Grail at that point. So thank you so much for watching. Please do like and subscribe, and please do leave in the comments if we've missed out any of the locations or any of the relics that you really like, and also your opinions on the relics that we've spoken about. But until then, we'll see you in the next episode.